Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 6. I hope that everybody is preparing for a wonderful Thanksgiving week. It looks like snow in the forecast, so please be careful and good luck to anyone in their travels and to our hunting folks and hunting families, anyone enjoying Wisconsin deer season. I want to take time to go over the content presented in this week's PowerPoint on disruptive behaviors. But prior to that, I want to make sure that you have gone through the readings, as the readings will provide some content knowledge that applies into this presentation. So if you haven't done that, jump back in, finish the readings first, then we'll go live with our presentation. So if you can open up the PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to go through it, but it might be nice for you to be able to take notes on if you have it printed off or if you use a note-taking format. But with that, I'm going to jump over into our PowerPoint. Give me just 1 second as we do that. Here we go. So you should now be able to see our presentation for disruptive behaviors. In this, what I really want to start with is making sure that you recognize the strategies for dealing with students as they begin to go through that Colvin curve. If you remember, there's an escalation curve in there. What we want to do is get on the front end of that and really think about, well, where is a child when they're starting that escalation continuum? And when we think about disruptive behaviors, we want to start, again, using our FBA brain to think of, well, why are they doing that? And what is the history that we know with their behavior pattern? And if we can do that proactively, we'll be able to keep them in that less than defensive stage. So one of the big outtakes for this is we want you to be able to think about behavior as how can we be proactive to it? And then when it does really explode and you get to that kind of release stage of the Colvin curve where you get to the highest peak, at that point, we want to be able to have already developed a plan where we can listen and respond in ways that are effective. And if we haven't developed a plan, if this is the first time we're encountering these behaviors with a student, we really want to make sure that we're listening and we're paying attention to what's going on, because some of those things are really going to help us in that post-vention and de-escalation period later. So without further discussion on that, this is an example of an intervention worksheet where we'd be looking at, well, if we know a certain student, or if we've got a group of students with similar needs, we could be looking at that self-monitoring type program, that token economy, kind of self-evaluation format that we can be teaching these things that go along with our antecedent strategies for teaching social skills, for teaching coping skills, where it says hurdle help here. That's a term used to kind of say, well, if we know that there's something that they're going to trip up on, how can we start the conversation by, hey, when we encounter this, when you're upset, here's a coping strategy. And then we also want to practice that. Those antecedent strategies need to be practiced. If we have a student who gets upset because of changes in the schedule, well, then we're going to foreshadow those changes. We're going to talk about, well, when this happens, if you don't get to have FIED because it's a different schedule for the day, this is what we can do. How can we cope? So we're processing through that when the child is at that calm stage before there's ever any escalation or any change that's going to trigger that. And we want to pre-teach those strategies. The behavior strategies on the other side is, well, what can we do on the positive so that when the child is behaving, we are reinforcing those behaviors, things like free time, activity, positive tokens. Those are the consequence strategies that reinforce and strengthen. But we also want to think about what are the reductive or the response cost type things. So in my self-contained classroom, I had a points type format. So if a child was leveled, if the child didn't behave well, or if they had a behavior outburst, they didn't lose any points that they'd already earned. They got to keep those, but their access into other things was decreased. So they went from green down to yellow, or so far even below that. Then that child missed out on other things that were outside of the points. They didn't lose what they had, but instead they lost the access to be able to go to other classes, kind of in that leveling. So something to think about. And again, this is the pre-planning. This is having a plan before we ever get to that behavior outburst. As we work through, one of the things we want to talk about in regards to our articles is if we are looking at the reactions to the behavior. So if you have a student in our class and they're starting to escalate and they start yelling, well, what are we as adults going to do in a reaction to that? Because there's a lot that the students' behaviors will escalate or de-escalate based on how we respond. So if a student yells, as a counterpart, if I yell back, well, then we can assume that the student's behavior is going to escalate farther. That forced dominance is really not, I guess, a beneficial approach with a lot of our special ed students or a lot of students with emotional behavioral disabilities. Instead, if we escalate towards them, then we usually escalate their behavior as well. So what we want to do is have a plan for how are we going to approach in a productive and supportive manner rather than coming back and yelling at them or coming back and targeting them and making demands on them. So some strategies is if we see something, we first have to recognize, well, is this out of character for the student or is this in character? So if I have a behavior that is kind of something I can expect as a child goes up, well, then I want to think about, well, what are they getting out of it? How are they doing that? Why are they doing that? So if I see that, then I have to be able to manage that and respond in a way that is productive. So I want to be able to look at, well, if the student's raising their voice because they're frustrated, and now I know that when they've raised their voice, they start to physically posture, or they start to escalate even farther and want to control the classroom environment. Well, I have to think of, well, what is it that they're trying to get? So for myself, things that I look at is, okay, if they're looking for avoidance, can I let them avoid that right now? Can I work with the student to avoid that particular task or that particular person? If there's a avoidance of a person, they want to get out of a teacher's classroom. So how can I manage that by saying, okay, I'm going to give them in order for us to be able to get through this together. So I'm going to work with the student in a manner that is going to be able to reinforce the positive things that we've pre-taught for coping and not getting hung up on those things. And I can probably strengthen that relationship between the two of us. You also note there for trying to keep kids at a calmer level. Sometimes I will use things like visual timers to say, well, let's work on this, but we're only going to do it for this amount of time. When I'm working with younger populations, I'll throw a timer up on the smart board, or I have some hour clocks that are larger so kids can manipulate them and say, hey, we're only going to work on it for this amount of time. So I can use things like that to kind of get through that situation, or even giving them a break and doing the same thing. Hey, we're just going to take 5 minutes. Why don't you take this, or you can go over there. You can use bean bags. You can calm down. And if we do that, then you're not going to have to do the activity at this time. We're just going to put a delay on that. You can come back to it, but right now we're not going to continue to stress about it. So sometimes giving that control to the student, it gives them a little bit of that onus on, okay, I don't have to do this right now. Instead, I can calm down. I can come back to it later. Not avoiding the task, just delaying the task. Strategies. The litmus test, if you will, for what people call hostage is very different. So what I may view things as escalated versus somebody else is going to be completely different. So something that we want to think about, especially for a special ed teacher, is, well, how can I work with classroom teachers to know where those lines are? Because you'll have some students that come across as just being very kind of rash, and we don't want the teacher to respond to the kid just maybe not understanding how to interact appropriately with the teacher. So if they question the authority, maybe they're just questioning it because it's an honest question. We want them to be able to, respond as teachers to that question in the appropriate manner. As I talked about, sometimes allowing students to escape. If I say, hey, right now I can see that you're upset with, what you're expected to do in the classroom. Why don't we just go back to my resource room? Why don't we go down the hallway? We'll take a little bit of time. And when you're ready, we can engage in this. That's allowing that student to escape the stressor right then. And it's also delaying what that demand is. And if we can do that in a successful manner, we'll be able to keep them at a relatively low level sometimes. Not necessarily all the time, but that's our goal, is to be able to keep them from being escalated. Excuse me. So keeping it simple. So we've all seen students as they escalate, the less that we talk, the better that it is. I also like to be as black and white as possible. So if I have a consistent routine for how we do things, I will go back and rely on that routine. Many times I'll even say to the students, hey, you know what you got to do. And then I walk away. So the power in giving that responsibility to the student is then up to them. And if you walk away, it's really hard to argue with somebody that walks away. So if that student engages they start to become frustrated. If they turn and walk, out of the classroom, okay, allowing them to exit isn't necessarily always the best thing. But in that situation, if you yell at them or raise your voice in order to keep them there, what do we expect is going to happen? They're going to escalate. So instead, if I can work with the student to say, okay, hey, if you don't want to be here right now, where can we go? We can go to Mr. Larrabee's office. We can go to, Mrs. Hall's office. We can go to one of those resource people, so that then they can be allowed to have some time to calm down. So I'm taking that potential, volatile situation. If I would have yelled at the student at that time, gave them an alpha command that they needed to stay in class, they're probably going to escalate. So instead, I'm giving them power again, and I'm giving them some options. You can go here or you can go here. I'm not saying they get out of everything, but instead they have two choices to be able to work through. So ineffective responses. I have a real hard time when teachers ignore behaviors because if I'm ignoring the behavior that's inappropriate, then at some point that behavior is going to be ingrained. So instead of, ignoring it, if it's something little, tapping pencils, that's a different story. If I'm talking about if a kid swears or if a kid raises their voice, at some point I need to come back to that, and I need to be able to talk to them about it. Hey, this is what I saw, and here's why this can't happen. Now, that's not the time when that kid's escalating. So if you have an escalating student, it's not inappropriate by any means to just call them out on it. Hey, we don't talk like that here. I'm not personalizing it. I'm not raising my voice, but I'm just calling out the behavior, calling it what it is, and then I will later revisit it. So once the student is back down and they're in that calm state in the post-vention, I can come back to it and say, hey, this is what happened earlier. Here's a problem I have with this, or here's how this doesn't fit into what we do here in the classroom. We talked about this. This is how we agreed we would treat each other. So now let's revisit and change that so that we don't swear in the classroom. So again, as the student starts to escalate, again, if you think of Colvin's curve, we want to recognize where that student is upon there. On that continuum. And from a body language, we want to be able to speak softly and remain a calm body. So as that student becomes agitated and they escalate, common bad practices that adults will escalate with them. Instead, what I like to work with my staff on is keep your body calm and make your body present like you are calm. So even though you may be getting frustrated inside, we've got to hide that. We've got to maintain our composure because we want to focus on how to help the student. So if that student is escalating, we stay calm, we stay collected, and we don't engage in those power struggles. We don't, bite on what that child's trying to pick at so that we, do not escalate them ourselves. Excuse me. Again, knowing our students, we want to look at, well, what preventative measures do we know work with that student? So if we have a positive behavior intervention plan and we know that these are the things that we've already pre-taught, these are the things that we've already practiced, we want to rely upon those things. So go back to, hey, here's what we're working on. Here's the things that we've done. This is how we can calm down. So if we pre-taught where to go to de-escalate, if we pre-taught how that student is going to get through and over that hump, we can do that when the student is relatively low on the escalation continuum. If that student is way up at the top and they're venting, that isn't the time to be talking. So if the kid's already up to the top and they're blowing and it's verbal and they're just letting it go, we got to disengage. Again, keep it calm. Do not personalize it. We need to be reflective and we need to be calm in our responses. What I often say with teams when they're dealing with very violent or volatile students is listen to what they're saying, weed out all of the things that maybe aren't appropriate, but hold on to what's left in the middle where they're saying what's really bothering them. And when that student takes a calm voice or takes a calm breath, that's when we look at, okay, what did they say and how can I respond? So if that kid escalates and they're F-bombing this and they're yelling at the teacher, that's the time where we stop and we say, hey, I'm sorry that happened in class today. I'm not putting judgment on either side. I'm just recognizing what their stressor is. I'm meeting them in the middle to say, I'm sorry that happened. And once you do that, just listen for how they respond. If the kid blows again, give them more time. If that kid starts to come down, throw it out there. Hey, if you want to talk about it, we can. But I'm giving him the responsibility. I'm giving her the responsibility, giving them the choice in the matter so that they can choose when they want to engage and discuss that. And if they choose that they want to, then I'm going to take them down that de-escalation path. I'm going to stay calm. I'm going to keep my body neutral. I might even sit on the floor. I'm going to give them a chance to be able to sit down, but I'm going to use what they're giving me in order to turn that into a de-escalation. And once they're de-escalating, then I'm going to listen and I'm going to start processing through and talking to them about how to come out of this situation. According to Yale, some of those ways to strategies to deal with those behaviors are, again, don't hang up on what that particular behavior is, but instead go back to what is it that we've practiced. And if the student is continuing to escalate, keep yourself calm, keep yourself separated from them, give them some space. Nobody wants somebody hovering over them. If the kid's sitting in their desk, don't stand over them. Stand back 3 to 5 feet, 8 feet. Sometimes I'll be 10 feet away. I just look at the kid, try to communicate that I'm here for them and allow them to go down that escalation path. Here's a visual representation of kind of what I was talking about. Is think of that left-hand side where it's a lighter green there. If the student is calm, if they're still in their thinking brain, they're starting that process maybe of getting agitated, well, then let's go back to what are the things that we have put in place? What are the things that we have taught? And then how can we reinforce those positive performance? Once that kid gets to that peak and they're in that release, whether it be verbal or physical, we want to think of, well, what does our behavior intervention plan have in place? Or if we don't have one, start listening, start writing down, this is what the kid said, this is what the kid did. Because once they come down the other side of that hill and now they're in that tension reduction piece, they're recovering. Now is when we want to go back to, hey, I heard that this is what happened last night. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. What can we do to work through it? So I'm going to take what I learned in that peak and I'm going to revisit it when they're in that recovery, not in a judgment way. We want to be able to stay calm, stay non-biased. We want to be able to just say, hey, this is what I heard you say. I'm here for you. Based on that relationship I hopefully have developed with the student, I want to be able to get to that recovery piece and be able to use that whole process as a learning strategy with the student. I'm going to go quickly through those. If we think of a behavior escalation and we think of the student, I'm going to switch back, give me back to the speed. If we think of any student that you have in your classroom, if you don't have a behavior intervention plan in place or we haven't got to that level yet, that is completely okay. I want you to think about how do we escalate our students, or how do we respond when our students de-escalate? Because if you think of each of these 3 phases, we should in an intervention plan have a response at each of those phases. That first will be, well, how are we managing the behaviors in a proactive way? How have we pre-taught? How have we put things in place so that when the child does escalate, we get to the peak? How do we have a plan to be able to manage that? And then on the back end of it, how do we take the student back through this event? Because these big feelings, these big events are very difficult. And on the back end, we want to have a plan for, well, how do we inform parents of what happened? How do we talk to the teacher about what happened in their classroom so that they understand that this behavior is A, not okay, but B, being dealt with in a manner that is going to be a teaching manner. So having a plan on the backside for that reconnection, it may be difficult for a child who escalated to go back into that classroom. So how do we plan for that transition back? Do I talk with the teacher? Do we talk with the student and the teacher together? What time do we stay out for the rest of the day? Do we stay out for a couple of days? All of those things can be built into your intervention plans as that recovery phrase. And if we see students escalate, how do we come back to that? So again, these are all examples of how do we plan for and how do we behave as adults when we see students that are behaving in ways that are disruptive or dysregulated. So I know I gave a lot to you and a lot of talking points to go along with this slide deck, but obviously I'm passionate for it. I want to make sure that we are preparing for our students in a way that is supportive of them. So if you have questions, as always, shoot me an email. I hope, again, everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and I will see you all next week.